Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the International Relations Council for this deep dive into the Peace Corps at 60. This panel conversation is part of the IRC lecture series, which since our first speaker, Eleanor Roosevelt in 1955, has offered nuanced insight and broad perspective on critical global issues. My name is Matthew Hughes, and I serve as the Executive Director of the International Relations Council in Kansas City, and we're so glad to have you with us today. The International Relations Council strengthens Kansas City's global perspective by maintaining an active dialogue around world events, global issues, and their impact on our community. As a nonpartisan educational nonprofit organization, the IRC values informed civil discourse, accessibility, and substance as we work to sharpen our community's 21st century global acumen. Whether you're joining us live this evening or watching the recording of this program later on, we invite you to learn more about the International Relations Council, including other upcoming events and how to join the IRC as a member, on our website at irckc.org. Since its establishment by President John F. Kennedy in 1961, the Peace Corps has dispatched more than 240,000 Americans to support the needs of communities in 142 countries. As the world has changed over the last 60 years, so has the Peace Corps and the way it responds to local challenges at global scale. What role does the Peace Corps play in a rapidly changing world, and what sustains its relevance? The IRC is pleased to welcome a panel of experts, including a former director of the Peace Corps, a former regional director, and Peace Corps volunteers from 1961 to today for a retrospective and look ahead as the Peace Corps turns 60. We hope you'll be an active participant this evening. We certainly welcome your thoughtful questions through the course of the conversation using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And do check out and share other upcoming conversations in the IRC lecture series as we consider a range of critical global issues in the coming months. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening's program, who will introduce our panelists and help us navigate the conversation. Mike Wood really needs no introduction to many in our audience. Mike began his career by serving for 8 years as a Peace Corps volunteer and senior Peace Corps official with the Department of State in Asia, Africa, and Washington, D.C. Mike is now in his 4th career, serving on local, national, and international nonprofit boards. Prior to this phase, Mike taught for 15 years on the Health Administration faculty of the Block School of Management at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He's a longtime member and past board member and president of the International Relations Council and a true treasure in our Kansas City community. Mike, thank you so much for being with us this evening. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Matthew. As will become abundantly clear, this is a program that I've been looking forward to and can get very enthusiastic about. First, I want to send our warm good wishes out to Robert Crisco, who was to be with us tonight. He was in Ghana 1, and among Peace Corps old hands, that's holy territory. He was to be on the panel, but had to withdraw at the last moment. Let's meet our panel tonight, though. We're happy to have Jessica Schwalwiger with us tonight. She comes to us by way of the University of Nebraska, though a native of Olathe, and by way of Mali and Burkina Faso from 2012 to 2014. She continues her work to this day in public service, as so many volunteers do, by working at the Social Security Administration. And she is notably tonight president of the Kansas City Area Peace Corps Association. Welcome, Jessica. And then there's Jim D'Amico, who's joining us tonight. He's a Kansas City native and an engineer and a physical therapist by trade, I gather. He's also lived a dream joining the Peace Corps, though it took him a few years to get there. He's had 2 very recent assignments in Thailand and Mongolia, plus a COVID-19 interrupted tour in Nepal, though he remains very much in touch with Nepal. He devotes a great deal of time and energy to recruiting, let me say, mature Peace Corps volunteers and supporting them 50 plus. And our guest of honor, particularly tonight, we're delighted to have Carrie Hessler-Rodlet with us tonight. She spent 40 years in development internationally, including service as a Peace Corps volunteer in Western Samoa in the 80s, and then as the 19th director of the Peace Corps, having been appointed by President Obama. Her work continues as president and CEO of Project Concern International, a global development organization. Welcome, Carrie. We're delighted to have you here. The Peace Corps, the participants tonight have some 22 years of Peace Corps experience, volunteer and staff, for over 60 years. Tonight, we'll delve into some history of the Peace Corps and how it's evolved over time and take a glimpse of what it might look like in the future. And it's appropriate that this program be held in Kansas City because it's where former Peace Corps Director and Senator Paul Coverdell grew up. The idea of volunteers serving in newly independent countries didn't start with the Peace Corps. The Brits and the Aussies had similar programs dating in the early 50s. But the question is, what started the Peace Corps? Why don't you start us off, Carrie? Can you remind us of the 3 goals of the Peace Corps?
Sure. Thank you so much, Mike. And what a privilege it is to be among all of you, and especially with this fantastic group. You know, starting when Peace Corps is one of those rare organizations that has not changed its mission in 60 years. Our mission is world peace and friendship. And that has not changed for as long as we have been in existence. Peace Corps has 3 goals. The first goal is to help other nations, help the people of interested nations meet their needs for trained men and women. So it really does help our country foster the development of strong, stable, and prosperous developing country partners. So the first goal is a development goal. The second goal is to promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of other countries. And then the third goal is to promote a better understanding of other countries on the part of Americans. So the second and the third goals work together around the issue of Americans coming together with people of other nations. And that's really where the world peace and friendship happens, I think.
Yeah. Jessica, were those goals in your mind in 2014, 15, and so forth, when you were serving and teaching in what I unfortunately still call Upper Volta, but indeed Burkina Faso? Were those in your mind as you went about your work, or was that sort of an abstract concept?
I mean, I feel like that was the main part of your service. Yes, you had goals and things that you're trying to accomplish, but I mean, even in your first year, they tell you just to focus on getting to know your community. Like, we're not here to be like, hi, we're Americans, we're going to tell you what to do. Like, that's not the point of the Peace Corps. So, I mean, the very first part was just getting to know people around you and learning the language and cultural norms, and them getting to know you and dispelling stereotypes of America. And yeah, so it wasn't really that abstract once you're there and thrown into it.
Jim, do these goals still hold up today?
Sure, even more so, I guess, especially because we're also connected through the internet. I can't even imagine the volunteers 60 years ago. They would have to wait till they came home, or that 1 or 2 letters that they sent home. Now I can just FaceTime my family, put on a video blog or whatever. And the same thing with the host country nationals. It's like they're also connected to the internet, so they have a lot more almost more ingrained ideas of what they think, from TV and everything and movies, what Americans are. And then, now you have to kind of just tell them, oh, it's not all true. So yeah, I think it's even more important.
Go ahead, please, Jim. I'm sorry.
No, I think, like I say, with the connection, with especially developing countries becoming more and more connected through internet and media, that the goals 2 and 3 are probably just as important, if not more important, than the first one.
One of our objectives tonight at our 60th anniversary is to talk about what it was like in the beginning and how we've evolved. So if you'll permit me a minute, I just want to reminisce a bit in those early years of Peace Corps, we were motivated by President Kennedy. And I personally was motivated by his assassination. But all we had, most of us, were our BA degrees and a lot of goodwill. Our skills were not particularly sharpened, except a little bit through training. The groups were quite evenly split between men and women. So, sadly, there was not much cultural diversity in the groups. Some. It was an interesting environment, some of you will recall or have read about. There were the end of the colonial era, newly independent countries. Robert Crisco would have told us about Ghana 1, and the non-aligned movement with Nkrumah and Sukarno and some of those names from the past. We were given book lockers, if you can believe that. These were packages with 30 or more books in them to help you get through the, I'll say, isolation, being away from home. You weren't allowed to go on vacation to Europe or to many other places. You certainly weren't allowed to drive. And training. I trained in Hawaii. Tough duty, yes, sir. I oversaw training programs in Virgin Islands and, wait for it, Quebec. Language immersion. Jessica, get me out of this. Where did you train?
We trained in country. So just to remind everyone, I started in Mali, was there a few months in 2011 to 2012, and then left Burkina in 2014. But yeah, it was in training, or in country. You were with a group of other Americans to begin with, and in host families, but then after that, got sent out to your sites. So
I think it was, I dare say, a good deal more relevant than what we had. I don't want to demean, we had some wonderful faculty and language instructors and so forth, but it's a lot different being in country. How isolated were you? What challenges did you face in Burkina Faso that you think of today, and how did you deal with them?
So I guess when we got to site, people were always surprised when you come home to know that, yes, I was the only American in that town, and no one spoke English there. So initially it was isolating because you don't know, it's just like moving to a brand new place here. You don't know anybody. You have to get out in your community and get to know people. And then by the end of it, those people are like your family. So.
How far were you from Ouagadougou?
Burkina Faso thankfully had better roads. Like I was on a main road, so it was like a 9-hour bus ride to Ouaga. But some volunteers, they were not as lucky. They were in areas where, during rainy season, the road would get washed out. So it was a lot harder to get places. So it really varied from country to country. But Peace Corps always did a good job of making sure we did have a way to get to people. And I did have another volunteer that was like a 30-minute bike ride from me. So
Sure.
That was nice.
Did you have a cell phone, and could you have service, or did you have a laptop, or both?
I did have a cell phone. It was just like a little brick Nokia phone. There's the good old fashioned snake game on there you could play. Some volunteers did have smartphones that they did have there, which there was always pros and cons to that. Some people thought it wasn't good. They're like, we need to not have phones and be cut off and really be immersed. But it did really help promote the third goal, like while you were there. So there's pros and cons to it, where people were able to share stuff on social media like almost instantly. And Burkina Faso people did have smartphones too. So it's
yeah,
I think
great.
that.
Jim, compare your experiences with my description of the early days, book lockers and training in Hawaii and so forth. Speak a bit about today's volunteers, their assignments, and what you experienced there generally.
Kind of like what Jessica said. It just depends on which country. So like in Thailand, I was 9 hours from Bangkok. In Mongolia, I was 17 hours from the capital. that was a long, long journey. Yeah, I mean, I think they're all different. Like Thailand, didn't seem as isolating just because there's so many people in Thailand. I mean, you can't go, 1 mile down the road and you run into another village. So it's, people everywhere. Whereas Mongolia was, extremely no people but, vast distances. So I don't even know how. I think I was maybe 4 hours from the nearest volunteer. So yeah, I mean, so isolated it in a physical sense, but then again, I think now with, technology, cell phones, internet, I've had internet in all 3 countries, not always great, but at least sometimes. Same thing with cell phone coverage. And like I said, the locals all have cell phones too, so it's not like it's special for the volunteers. So I think especially like in Nepal, I had a few volunteers. I don't know if it was just because I was older or I'm just a friendly guy, but I would get regular calls from people that were, it keeps the isolation at bay, especially when you're having a bad day. When you're in a different culture and people are speaking a language that you're not comfortable with, the cultural norms are different. It can be quite stressful. So having that connection, I hope it would show in that maybe there are less volunteers going home, going home early because they do have this connection with other volunteers during their service. Kind of a
remind us your skill. What were you doing? You were teaching?
Yeah, I was teaching. I was in the education sector in all 3.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Gary, chime in, please, with your perspective, both as a volunteer and then leading the organization some 30 years later. Or 25, whatever. How did it change? How did your perspective change?
Yeah, I mean, I think my experience was halfway between your experience, Mike, and then that described by Jessica and Jim. I served in Samoa. I served with my husband, so that was different. I mean, we were living together. I had my built-in best friend. So I think in some ways that made it easier. We were very remote. Samoa is a very remote island. We made 1 phone call home within about the first year. So only 1 phone call in the entire 2.5 years that we were in the Peace Corps. So it wasn't like today where you can call your mother every day if you want, frankly. And we had those blue aerograms. That's how we communicated with the world. Today, every volunteer has a cell phone. It's part of our safety and security program. It's essential really now. And the truth of the matter is the world is connected by technology. More people have access to cell phones than have access to clean water and sanitation. So that is the way of the world. Mm-hmm. And as Jim really, I think, nicely pointed out, that the technology that's available to volunteers today can really help, both in terms of, the second and third goal, being able to really support learning across, you can do we could do this in fact, many times when I was director, we would have public events where I would loop in via Zoom a volunteer from that nation or from that particular geographic area, Pennsylvania or Kansas or Colorado, with a volunteer who was serving in Colombia or in Cameroon or what have you. So that in real time, they could talk about their experiences, maybe show us a little bit of their neighborhood using their cell phone. So I mean, there's so many advantages to technology. I do think that to some extent it can make it easier to not engage in the way that Jim, you were talking about. I still think that the most important thing volunteers do is develop those relationships of trust that are transformational, both in terms of our own life story and the impact of Peace Corps on our lives, but also in terms of what we leave behind with our communities and the ways in which, through our relationships, we're able to help people see the world beyond the horizons of their village. I mean, that's some of what I hear the most from the host country nationals that I've heard from.
While you have the floor, Carrie, could you talk a minute about how recruiting has changed? The target market, as some of our for-profit people would say, who are you going after, and does it has it evolved over time? I know my group, as I've said, was young men and women, recent college graduates often, and not particularly diverse. How has that changed, or did you see it change?
Yeah, we saw quite a lot of change, actually. I mean, today's Peace Corps really wants to reflect the rich diversity of our nation. And so we have a very strong recruitment program that reaches into underrepresented groups to try to have a more reflective view of our country, you know, as we serve as volunteers. We have a whole cadre of diversity volunteers, and they are incredible in terms of creating connections with different universities. I mean, some of the, like the historically Black colleges and universities, the Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges and universities. We created some partnerships with different sororities and fraternities that are more representative of a diverse set of individuals. The work that we're doing to recruit volunteers over 50 is really important. And Jim, I'm so delighted to know that you're involved in that. I mean, I just think that age diversity is such a wonderful side benefit. And one of my most favorite moments in Peace Corps was visiting our oldest volunteer in Morocco, whose name was Alice Carter. She was 87 years old. And she was paired with a volunteer whose name was Jeremiah DeQueen, who was from Cleveland, and he was a young Black man, and they were so extraordinary together. Their friendship, their partnership, they were both working. Alice, who was 87, was working in youth development. But what was beautiful was the intergenerational collaboration and support, and they were a phenomenal pair. So I do think that having a volunteer force that represents our country is really important. We put a lot of very deliberate focus on that. And we saw our diversity numbers go from 14% in 2010 to 39% when I left in the very beginning of 2017. That's a pretty extraordinary jump, actually.
Well, I certainly remember, and you've heard that you remember Lillian Carter, the president's mother, joined in 1966 at 68 years of age. And that was just headlines all over the place. So,
right. Well, my own grandparents served in the Peace Corps when they were 71, when they began their service when they were 71.
Terrific. Jessica, talk about your preparation. Did you feel that you were prepared to be a teacher, or what you were doing? Did you feel well prepared to go to that assignment, or did you feel you were dropped in fairly cold?
So I was a health education volunteer. So, I mean, in Burkina Faso, we're working on, pretty basic stuff like hygiene, nutrition.
Right.
And I was pre-med at the time, like when I joined Peace Corps, but so, I did have a background in health, and some of our health education that we have in the United States, we take for granted that that's not like everywhere. So, we are prepared in that aspect. And then you do go through training for specific things like malaria prevention, because obviously we're not having to deal with that here. So, you do get that training and how to interact with people in your community. And then, the whole point of Peace Corps is we're not, just going in and telling people. We're finding community leaders to work with that are going to help with that information.
As I've told you before, when I was in Abidjan with the Peace Corps, we always considered Burkina Faso and Mali to be some of the most remote, isolated experiences. Talk about your time in Mali and what caused you to move to Burkina Faso.
So unfortunately, there was a coup d'etat in Mali in 2012 that was caused by a lot of instability throughout West Africa. I mean, if any of you follow any of that news with Libya and then just terrorist linked organizations pouring into different countries and then unfortunately taking control in unstable political environments. I won't go into all the detail. I mean, you can do some research. BBC does a really good job of breaking down how everything unfolds. But so we got evacuated because they just, with Peace Corps, one of their number one things is safety of volunteers. I mean, we were fine in village. Like when you're in village, like you're pretty much okay most of the time, but because all of that was unfolding, we had to leave. And that was in April of 2012. And Mali had 41 years of uninterrupted service there with Peace Corps. It was very stable, and to like watch that unfold was heartbreaking. And then unfortunately the same thing happened in Burkina Faso, and there's still stuff going on today. I mean, even before COVID, Peace Corps had already pulled out of those countries, unfortunately. And it's really sad because I still keep in contact with those people, and thankfully they're doing all right.
Jim, you were evacuated as well, thanks to COVID-19. You want to talk about that a little bit, how that was handled and what the volunteers did or are doing?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like, again, we're all connected, through social media and everything. And so a lot of the volunteers in Nepal, we've been hearing about places like Mongolia was talking about, evacuating their volunteers. And there was one, I think maybe Philippines was talking about it. And so we kept thinking, oh no, they won't evacuate us. We're fine. And even our country director made it sound like, no, we're fine, guys. And then sure enough, one day we get the text message, you have 24 hours, say your goodbyes, meet us in the capital. So that was kind of, and I know every volunteer that's ever had to evacuate, has gone through the same thing, to, pack up and, and especially not knowing if you're going to come back. I thought for sure we would be back in a couple months. I was hoping that, so maybe my goodbye wasn't near as tearful, because I thought, okay, I'm just temporarily leaving. We all got to the Capitol, and the Peace Corps staff, I mean, here's something they probably plan for these kind of things, but to actually do it and get all the volunteers in a short order of time. For Nepal, we were actually under the wire because the government had already said it was going to close the airport. And so Peace Corps was frantically trying to get seats on different planes. So various groups of us, throughout the day would head to the airport. And I think I was on the last plane to actually leave Nepal before it closed. So the staff just went through, they were on the phones constantly trying to find different seats here and there, and trying to keep us all, I mean, there's still lots of other things to take care of when you leave your service. So, medically, see if you have any recent problems, bank accounts, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, they did a phenomenal job and smiled through the whole thing. And even the tearful goodbyes, as the last bus left for the airport, all the staff lining the drive of the hotel just to wave us off. It was pretty, pretty heart-wrenching, especially when you kind of consider that we were flying into New York, which was at the time one of the hottest spots, of COVID at the time. And so it's like, oh, Nepal was nothing in Nepal. It's just, why didn't we stay? So it was definitely, even now, I think I have mixed emotions as far as, I wish we would have stayed, or at least in some, I didn't, as far as some places that could have stayed as opposed to a whole global evacuation. So
like you, the rest of the panel, I think I can identify with the emotional trauma of doing that, having normal completion of service, and seeing volunteers in the Philippines where I was also just and a very emotional culture where people show their emotions. Just leaving a normal tour was gut-wrenching in many ways. That's I find very, very interesting, and I wonder if people are still hoping to go back or whether their lives have moved on. Let's take a look more forward-looking. Carrie, if you would take a chance based on your experience as volunteer again and as director of the Peace Corps, how do you see the Peace Corps handling the challenges faced in recent years? And I think of women's security, the relevant programming. Just a footnote, I recall in the 60s and early 70s, tremendous protests in Latin America of volunteers in the favelas, the slums, complaining and threatening to resign because they had no work that they could identify, that they were sort of assigned randomly. Well, I hope and I think it's changed for the better. Can you take us on a little tour of what's going on now in that regard?
Sure. I think we are more scientific about it these days. I mean, the volunteers are placed in countries where they are requested, and even within the country, within communities that are requested. And so it's not a random process anymore. It's a really well thought out, well planned process. Peace Corps works only in 6 sectors. I think in the early days, there was any number of, hundreds and hundreds of different job descriptions. It was a lot more random than it is now. And the Peace Corps staff in country works very closely with the host government and with host communities to ensure that the work the volunteers are doing really does correspond to the needs of those communities. A big thing that when I was at Peace Corps was to try to ensure that the work that volunteers were doing were really based on evidence and that we're going to lead to proven development results. We want to make sure that volunteers, in order to accomplish goal 1, that they were really working closely on those activities that had proven to achieve development impact. And we work closely with universities and with government organizations like USAID or the MCC to ensure that our work was really based on best practice. As I look forward, and you asked about looking forward, I still think that the basic model of the Peace Corps is really strong. And in fact, I would say that it's needed more now than ever before. Our country, our world is more fractured than it ever has been, I think, in some ways. And I really believe that especially goals 2 and 3 are critically important. I also think there's a lot to do with, in terms of goal 1, one of the most interesting and I think innovative things we did was the Global Health Service Partnership, which is part of Peace Corps Response, where we recruited doctors and nurses to serve as Peace Corps response volunteers. And they signed up for a year. Many times they extended that time. And they worked in medical schools and nursing schools and were really helping to build the capacity of health systems. The same kind of work was done by organizations like John Snow. Mike, I know you work there. And we know how much it costs to put a doctor in the field. It costs in excess of $250,000 a year all in. And these were very highly qualified doctors who were serving for, a fraction of that as Peace Corps volunteers. And so that program was really targeted to help it build capacity around HIV and AIDS. And I think that there's a huge opportunity to reinstate that program. It was stopped under the previous administration, but I hope very much that when we go back into Peace Corps countries, that we will consider that program again as part of a COVID response. I think there's a huge need to build health systems capacity, and there are many health professionals in our country who want to serve in the Peace Corps. So that's one thing I would do.
A couple of things come to mind. Doctors in my programs and where I was a volunteer as well were public health service uniformed corps physicians, pretty much just out of medical school internship, hadn't gone to residency yet, and they were terrific. they also had a job that was draft exempt,
Mhm.
not volunteers, who of course could be drafted. How do you find medical staff now to take care of volunteers? Is that the group you were talking about, or were those to care for host country folks?
No, they're the medical staff, the Peace Corps medical officers are recruited mostly locally. And I mean, that was another thing that we did during my time at Peace Corps, is that we really improved the credentialing process to make sure that everyone we hired was really fully capable of doing their job and that they were up to speed on the latest medical practices. As Jessica pointed out, the health and safety of volunteers is Peace Corps' absolute top priority. And some of our countries, especially the referral, we have medical hubs where volunteers are sent from surrounding nations. We often have American doctors and nurses or third country nationals there who are very highly qualified in emergency medicine and other, sexual assault, recovery and what have you. So we also, I mean, the other thing that you mentioned was the whole issue of sexual assault. That's a huge issue. It's a huge issue in our nation. It's a huge issue around the world. And it's something that Peace Corps has really, tried to tackle in terms of building the capacity of first responders to use trauma-informed care and best practice, improving the quality of training for volunteers to help them keep safe, and improving the response on the part of our Peace Corps staff in country. So, the health and safety could not be more important, and it's very evidence driven. And we work closely with the State Department on ensuring the safety of volunteers.
That's good to hear, because I remember even back 40, 50 or more years, that was an issue even back then, not at the top of the list, but it certainly was an issue. Jessica, do you foresee a time when the Peace Corps is no longer necessary? Easy question.
Well, I mean, there are some countries that we served in that at one point we deemed we were no longer needed there. But I mean, if we're really focusing in on those second and third goals, I feel like it's always needed. I mean, just because Peace Corps is in a country doesn't mean like that country can't function,
Sure.
on its own. Like, I mean, just like Carrie touched on, our world is so fractured, and that on the ground experience, like, you're not going to get from reading a book. Like, it's not the same at all. Like, I mean, being there and really knowing people from that place really stops this whole us versus them mentality, or like those people over there, like, and not really understanding what's actually going on. And I mean, just in being in Burkina Faso, I mean, it's West Africa, and I was in a village, with no electricity, running water, but I mean, at the end of the day, we all have the same hopes and dreams. Like, want our kids to have a good education. We want people to be healthy and succeed. And so, I mean, I mean, I feel like in that regard, it would always be needed.
Jim, I was thinking of Mongolia the other day. A colleague of mine at the Block School of Management has a student enrolled in his class from Mongolia via Zoom, of course. And who'd have thunk it, some years ago. But for you, the same question, and you were in Southeast Asia or East Asia. And in some ways, those countries, particularly Thailand, are a lot different than Sub-Saharan Africa or the Sahel, that region of Africa. What's your take on the Peace Corps' continuing role?
Well, even though Peace Corps had been in Thailand almost, I don't think it was in the first group, but it was in the first couple of years. I remember having lunch with the American ambassador at the time, and she said, "Oh, I think Peace Corps is finished here in Thailand," and I was horrified. But mostly because if you go to a place like Bangkok, students were fluent in English. They had all the technology they could, it was just like an American city. But you go to the countryside and it was even more difficult for them to catch up to their big city counterparts. And so,
Right.
to me, it was almost more needed because the divide between the haves and have-nots was unfortunately getting wider, not closer. So even in countries that are doing really well, I still think there's a need, especially, and that was one reason I joined the Peace Corps, was Peace Corps could get me to where people needed help. And I think that's where Peace Corps can really shine. And I think it shines ahead of so many other, relief organizations like Peace Corps, is because they do get out in those remote areas to get the help where it's needed. Even Nepal was having a big, right before the pandemic, the government was complaining that I think some 80% of the NGOs working in Nepal are in Kathmandu. It's like, but what about the rest of the country, So like I say, Peace Corps has such a history of going out to those remote areas. I think it would be great if the world developed to a place where we didn't need Peace Corps, but I don't think that will be in our lifetime. I think
You're
there's
probably right on that.
I think there's always going to be places that could really use our help.
Terry, how do you see Peace Corps fitting into today's domestic and international political and economic environment? A real politically delicate question for you, but
I just think that we need to connect as human beings, both in our nation and around the world. I mean, I think what is troubling us all, and I think it's just become worse with COVID, is just this isolation we all feel. We're all just driven to the poles of our, of who we are, and we're not reaching back across, to build relationships of trust that will enable us to work through the really tough issues that we face as a world. I would love to share a story if I could, because I think that, the richness of Peace Corps is often conveyed best by the stories. Could you give me 3 minutes to tell a story that I think really,
two, you'll find, go right ahead.
What's that? I'm sorry?
Do it in two, but you're fine. Please go ahead.
Do it in two. Okay. Well, I had a chance to meet with Alpha Conde, who was the president of Guinea, and he told me this story. He said that when he was a young man, 17 years old, he lived in a very small village, and there was a Peace Corps volunteer who lived next to him. And he said that this Peace Corps volunteer, his name was Joe, was the first person he could remember who really believed in him and his future. He told him stories about growing up in America and introduced him to the possibility of life outside his boundaries. And he helped him by tutoring him. And when he took his national exams, he said, I passed that national exam, and I'm confident I wouldn't have been able to do that if it weren't for that Peace Corps volunteer. And in fact, they're still lifelong friends today. But he said, even more important than that Peace Corps volunteer's impact on my life, which was profound, because I would not have ever been able to qualify for university, and then I would never become the president of my nation. But even more important than that is the impact your volunteers have had on my people. He said, during the 6 months that I spent campaigning for presidency, I visited volunteers. I visited more than 300 villages across my country, some of which were very, very remote. I would go out there, places where my own campaign staff wouldn't even go, and there were Peace Corps volunteers there. I went up to villages near the border of Mali, very, very dry, very hard to travel to. He said, I cannot get government officials to work there, but there were Peace Corps volunteers there. And then my area of the country, which was the central part where there were roads and what have you. So there are big international NGOs that work there that provide training, or they hand out food aid or what have you. But at the end of the day, they get into their big white SUVs and they drive back to the capital city. But the Peace Corps volunteers, they stay. By your presence, this is the most important thing. By your presence, you tell my people that Americans care about them, that my people are so important to you that you're willing to give us your most precious asset, your sons and your daughters, your mothers and your fathers, and that those volunteers are willing to leave everything that is dear to them to travel thousands and thousands of miles from their homes in the United States to learn our language, to eat our food, to learn about our culture, celebrate our holidays, and work on our priorities. Your being there validates my people in ways that sending them money, even building them a school, could never, ever accomplish. In all honesty, he said, your being there validates my people even more than the millions and millions of dollars of foreign assistance your country sends my country every year. And my people are proud to share their culture, their language, their development priorities with you. And they're proud to work side by side to work on a better world together. You give them a hand up and not a handout. And that makes all the difference. And I have to tell you, I heard that story time and time again from more than 10 presidents around the world who had a Peace Corps volunteer who helped them see a vision of themselves that was beyond their village and gave them just that little head start that enabled them to attain great things. And these are presidents who are, trying their hardest to bring freedom and peace and development to their country, and who believe that Peace Corps is one of our country's greatest gifts to other countries. So I share that story because I think that no matter how developed our world is, we will still need this human-to-human connection.
Carrie, that's a wonderful story. I didn't quite hear the country that Joe served in.
Guinea.
Guinea, okay.
Guinea
Stay
in West
tuned. I've got a
Africa.
story about Guinea also.
Yeah.
We've got time for a couple of questions from our audience panel. A quick one, Carrie, is the Peace Corps up and running? It must have been
Not
a
yet.
huge logistical challenge.
Yeah,
Just
no,
a quick
unfortunately.
answer.
Well, the Peace Corps is up and running. We still have staff in 60 plus countries around the world. They're still preparing for volunteers. They're upgrading their training. They're improving their medical protocols. They're working hard to prepare for Peace Corps reentry, but we do not have any volunteers in the field right now.
Jim, what do you think? This is a question from Lawrence Ruse. What would you think about a universal mandatory service requirement obligation in the country, whether international or domestic? This is to Jim D'Amico.
I don't know. I think nowadays mandatory is not a very politically correct word these days.
My bad.
Yeah. No, you're right. But I do think it would be, and I think Americans, given the opportunities, if it was like students were educated and universities saying, take a gap year after you graduate to give back to the communities that you've grown up in, whether it's here in America or overseas. I think if there's more talk about that, so that new graduates don't automatically have to assume that I have to go jump right into the workforce, that I could do a year's service somewhere. I think that would be huge, and Peace Corps would definitely reap benefits, especially if it was
the country would too. The country would reap benefits,
Yeah.
Do you have any sense, Jim, of when evacuated volunteers might get back into service? Or I know you wish you did.
Yeah, I am one of the, I don't know how many volunteers are still waiting for reinstatement, but I'm constantly WhatsApp chatting with my country director. The only thing that we've been told is that we would be notified 3 months ahead of time when they would be calling volunteers back. I know we would still have to do medical checkups real quick before that. I'm hoping that it's in next year sometime. I'm actually a little bit surprised that someone in Congress hasn't said, hey, we're paying for this organization, but it's not doing anything right now. But I think with the vaccines, more and more countries are opening up to tourism. I think basically everybody's saying, yeah, we're gonna have to live with this pandemic, but we can't just put everything on hold. And so I think Peace Corps eventually will be the same way. That's like, we have valuable skills that we could give, especially during this time for the pandemic. I think even as an education volunteer, I could work in the schools as far as educating, on hygiene and, other kind of health benefits, not just English. And I think all the Peace Corps volunteers will probably have COVID as one of their little side jobs. So I think I'm hoping that the people in Washington are listening and they're saying, yeah, we're going to get you out there as fast as we can. So
that's a good lead into Jessica. I'm going to ask you to tell us a bit about the Kansas City Area Peace Corps Association, particularly as relates to Jim's last comment.
Yes.
Congress, you've been active in supporting Peace Corps legislation to assure continued funding. Take a minute to talk about the association and your role in doing that.
So yeah, I'm a president of the Kansas City Area Peace Corps Association. So we're affiliate of the National Peace Corps Association, which is a nonprofit. It's not Peace Corps, so we can advocate on behalf of Peace Corps. Like we're able to do that.
Right.
So our group, we have an advocacy coordinator, Kirsty Morgan, who has done a great job of contacting members of Congress on both sides of the state line, Missouri and Kansas, meeting with them, telling stories like what Carrie shared today of why Peace Corps is important still, even though we're not on the ground, and continuing, because yes, it is funded by tax dollars. So at the end of the day, we have to keep reminding them that this is important and that we still need Peace Corps. So, and I did hear from our recruiter that Dominican Republic may go back in January, but we'll see. I mean, we also have to look at, it's not just Congress saying, can we go back? It's those countries, and are they going to let us in with the rates of COVID that we have? So, yeah.
How were you received generally, or your colleagues who called on Congress people? Were they generally positive or suspicious, or because I remember 60 years ago, that was quite a political item, the very idea of Peace Corps, young people going overseas to cause trouble, what did you find?
I mean, unfortunately, with our groups here in the Midwest, we don't meet with actual members of Congress most of the time. I think the only one I remember we actually met with was Claire McCaskill, who's no longer in Congress, but so it's usually their staff members, and they talk to people all day. So usually they're very nice, but at the end of the day, is their representative voting for Peace Corps. Sometimes I don't want to get political or say one party is better than the other, but I wish this wasn't a political thing. And being in other countries and helping other countries should just be a given, no matter who is in office.
Well, forgive me for putting you on the spot. As we close, I'm reminded of an account of Peace Corps' expulsion from Guinea, Carrie. In 1966, Sékou Touré, the then president, saw fit to kick the Peace Corps out of his country in a fit of pique over some perceived slight by the US. As the 150 Peace Corps volunteers waited to board their chartered flight out of Conakry, Guinea's vice president, at Sékou Touré's request, gave a warm farewell speech testifying to the personal skills and values the departing volunteers had brought to his country. He shook hands with the country director and thanked him profusely for the Peace Corps service. 6 months later, the same country director, Henry Norman, was invited back to Conakry for a private dinner with Sékou Touré, who once again thanked Peace Corps for sending volunteers. And the Peace Corps has been back in Guinea for many years. Carrie, I think you'll agree.
Yeah.
That story, titled Exit Smiling, appears in the Peace Corps Reader, written in 1967. What accounts for the enduring relevance of the Peace Corps? I guess it all comes down to the individual volunteer, just as it should. Matthew?
Mike, thank you so much. And thanks so much to all of our panelists. Carrie Hessler-Radelet, former director of the Peace Corps. What a treat to have you with us virtually in Kansas City, and may it be in person at some point.
Thank you.
Uh,
Such a privilege to be here with everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
And Jim and Jessica, as always, thank you for contributing tonight. Mike, a fine job moderating, and we always appreciate your support at the International Relations Council. The Peace Corps has a long and storied history, and we hope that you'll take time to learn more about the Peace Corps, some of the stories that you heard tonight. And the Peace Corps Association here in Kansas City, which is an organizational member of the IRC, is a great resource. And so you can find out more about them at irckc.org, where you can link to the organizational member directory. We hope that you'll join us for some other upcoming programs. We have some interesting panels and lectures in the coming weeks, as well as discussion groups and other offerings. So again, irckc.org. Thanks so much, everybody. We appreciate your being with us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you all very soon.
Thank you.